Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. Baltimore wears fog the way old ships wear salt. It clung to Pratt Street that morning, softening the brick, swallowing the neon beading on the stainless window of my food truck parked a block from the courthouse. Old Bay hung in the air from the crab shacks by the harbor. Somewhere down by the piers, a freighter horn moaned once and went silent. "No one asked you to do this," my son said. "That's not how family works," I told him. Noah's brace clicked faintly on the granite as we took the steps, his hand tight around my arm. He'd once bounded upstairs, 2 at a time, blueprint tubes under his elbow, talking about arches and load paths. Now each rise was a math problem his body had to solve. The reporters noticed before the guards did: black coats, long lenses, a polka dot of umbrellas in the mist, microphones pushed forward. "Shh, Mr. Callahan." "Why the transfers from the project account?" "Ms. Callahan, will you comment on the alleged embezzlement?" They knew my last name. That told me everything about what today would be like. Inside the courthouse smelled like floor wax and paper that had been filed too long. Fluorescents hummed. The security line moved slow, a belt of belts and shoes and trays. We made it through. Courtroom 5 had bench seating with the shine worn off where elbows had lived for decades. The seal of Maryland hung behind the judge's chair like a coin no one spent anymore. Lydia was already there. White suit hair smooth enough to throw light ankles crossed at the exact angle that says "composure" on camera. She kept her eyes on the table, not on my son. Beside her sat a man who smiled with most of his teeth, a navy tie cut sharp. Trent Malloy. I knew the type. Baltimore breeds them, polishes them, puts them behind lecterns. Noah eased into the chair at counsel table and breathed out through his nose a sound he probably thought I didn't hear. His knuckles were white around the cane. I placed my hand over his and felt the tremor traveling his bones. "It's just a room," I said quietly. "It's not the flood." He nodded once. His jaw worked and then stilled. "All rise," the bailiff called, voice flat with repetition. Judge Miriam Bennett came through the side door with a stack of files tucked under one arm and a coffee too black for foam in the other. Gray at the temples, eyes quick. Baltimore has a way of keeping score. No one forgets who put them on a witness stand. Her gaze moved across the gallery. The counsel tables landed where it was supposed to and then stopped. "Counselor Callahan," she said, not quite a question, her chin tightening the way a person's does when the past stands up without being called. I got to my feet. "Good morning, Your Honor." For a second, the room rewound 20 years, and I stood where the podium's wood showed a groove my ring had worn. She blinked just once, and the spell broke. "Appearances for the record," she said, voice even. Malloy did the cadence like he'd practiced in an office the night before. "Trent Malloy for the complainant, Lydia Vance, Your Honor." He leaned a half-inch so the cameras could take his better side. "We are prepared to proceed on our motion." I took my time setting down my bag. The leather was scuffed from nights my truck stayed open through Orioles' extra innings. I didn't apologize for it. "Ruth Callahan for the defendant, Noah Callahan," I said. "Notice of appearance filed this morning." Malloy's eyebrows performed the surprise. "Your Honor, Ms. Callahan hasn't tried a case in—" "Mr. Malloy," Judge Bennett said, "I didn't ask you." He smiled wider. "Of course." The judge flipped a page, its corner whispering across the next. "We're here on the state's request to maintain conditions of release and on Ms. Vance's motion for temporary restraining relief with respect to assets held in the names of Ruth and Noah Callahan property at 1102 Lancaster Street, bank accounts associated with the same." The words hit where they were aimed: our house by the water line of Fells Point. The one Noah remodeled with his own hands the summer he said, "A porch makes a home." I felt nothing change in my face. Feelings are a currency you don't spend in public. Malloy rose. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that over a period of 6 weeks, $310,000 was diverted from a designated seawall rehabilitation account into a private account controlled by the defendant." We will present bank records, internal approvals, and user credentials that tie each transfer directly to Mr. Callahan. Mrs. Vance has suffered severe reputational harm and financial exposure. We ask that the court freeze any assets that could be used to frustrate recovery. He set a file on the corner of his table like placing a trophy. Thank you, counsel, Judge Bennett said. Ms. Callahan. I stood, palms flat on cool wood. Your Honor, the defense has had less than 2 weeks to pull together what the other side has spent months curating for the press. We will show that the alleged transfers occurred when my client was physically incapable of accessing his work systems, and that the approval trail they'll parade is a facade built from inside the complainant's orbit. We ask that the motion to freeze be denied. In the alternative, that we be granted leave to submit a consolidated response and supporting exhibits within 10 days. Malloy started to rise. The judge lifted one hand without looking at him. He sat back down. Bennett's eyes didn't leave mine. There are rooms where memory does more work than rules. She had tried cases against me when we were both younger and less careful. She knew what I sounded like when I was bluffing. She also knew I rarely did. Ms. Callahan, she said, are you in good standing with the Maryland Bar? Yes, Your Honor. And you will be lead counsel? I will. Something small eased in Noah's shoulders at my words. The brace creaked. Lydia watched it all with the bland expression of someone sitting through a weather report that doesn't touch her street. Judge Bennett set her coffee down. The motion to freeze is denied without prejudice pending the defense's response. I will give you 10 days. The state's conditions of release remain. Mr. Malloy, you'll make your witnesses available for cross if and when we go beyond the papers. Yes, Your Honor, he said, folding his displeasure like a pocket square. A rustle went through the gallery. Reporters bent over their phones, thumbs moving. The bailiff coughed in the patterned way of men who've coughed in courtrooms for 30 years. Noah's hand loosened under mine. Mom, he said the word smaller than his frame. I know, I said. Breathe. We were dismissed. People stood because everyone stands even when no one says all rise. Lydia touched the cap of her pen to the pad and made a dot the size of a freckle. Malloy leaned in, whispering something that made her mouth tighten, and then pulled the file closer to himself as if someone might take it from him. On the way out, a clerk with a paper cup of water stopped short and nearly spilled it. Ms. Callahan, she said, cheeks flushing. My aunt used to talk about you, she said. The clerk swallowed and tried again. She said you were never mind. She pressed the cup into my hand. For your son, she added and fled. We cleared the doorway. The hallway tile reflected us in broken squares like a cheap mirror. Noah's cane tip left a dark dot every 3 feet. He hated the sound and I knew it, so I started talking about anything else. The truck's going to fog up if I leave the steamer on, I said. He glanced over and a ghost of a grin tried to stand. You're thinking about crab cakes during a hearing. I'm thinking about revenue, I said. I paid good money for the spot. City doesn't care about our feelings. At the doors, the fog was thinner. You could see the top of the Transamerica Tower like a tooth in the clouds. The press turned as a flock does. The questions came again, flung like stones. I put my body between my son and the worst of it, which is a kind of geometry mothers know without reading it. Ms. Callahan, no comment. Mr. Callahan, no comment. A young man with a camera on his shoulder asked in a voice that wasn't unkind. Is it true he signed off on the last transfer himself? Noah's jaw went hard. I didn't, he said. I shook my head once. That's all I told the cameras. We're done here. Back at the truck, the hood caught the fog and made it bead. I wiped it with my sleeve and unlocked the hatch. The stainless counter was clean enough to use as a mirror. For a second, I saw a woman I'd once been in a different building with fewer windows. She had worn black suits that didn't smell faintly of garlic and grease. The city had known her differently. The city knows a lot of things until it forgets. Noah climbed onto the small bench built into the truck's side and set his cane across his knees. A gull landed on the streetlight and looked at us like a judge head cocked. You don't have to carry the whole thing, he said. I'm not, I said. I'm carrying the part with handles. He nodded, either because he believed me or because he needed to. I fired the burner anyway. The little blue flame held steady against the draft that sneaks up Marketplace even on calm days. Across Pratt Street, courthouse doors breathed people in and out. Distant sirens rose and fell like the bay's tide. On the counter, my legal pad sat under a weight of rubber bands and binder clips. Ink bled a little where my notes had found the steam. It didn't matter. I'd written what I needed to remember. Inside the truck, the metal ticked as it warmed. Outside, Baltimore wore its fog and went on. The burner's blue flame steadied the truck's small world. Steam laced the air pepper and bay leaf and the metallic tick of warming steel. Noah sat on the bench with his cane across his knees, staring at a point somewhere beyond Pratt Street, beyond the fog, beyond the courthouse we had just left. I dropped a handful of buns on the griddle because muscle memory insists on routine when the mind won't settle. The sizzle sounded like a promise I could keep without asking anyone's permission. "You should rest," I told him. "I'm better when I'm moving," he said, but he didn't stand. A city inspector in an orange vest ordered coffee and a plain roll cash out of a folded clip, eyes soft with the look Baltimore gives its wounded. When he left, the quiet came back and stayed. I turned off the flame and let the truck cool. Aluminum contracts as predictably as the tide. The way the courthouse had smelled wax paper, old grievance pulled a thread in me I hadn't touched in years. Before the truck, before the grease stains on my cuffs and the habit of counting small bills twice, there had been a hallway outside a federal courtroom where my heels clicked like a metronome. I had chased bad money through shell contracts and dummy stevedore unions until all that was left was a line of numbers no one could explain. We were close. We had indictments drafted. A week before they would have been unsealed, someone higher up went glossy-eyed and careful, and the file I needed went missing. It takes only one knife to rearrange a life. I resigned without ceremony. The city survived my absence the way it survives winter. I learned what things cost by paying for them myself. I don't tell Noah that story often. He didn't need a legend. He needed lunch packed in wax paper and someone who knew which forms the school sent home mattered and which didn't. He grew in straight lines. He liked instructions, and he liked the way drawings can become steel without raising their voice. When he got the job at Harborspan, he walked in the door holding the hard hat like a kid holds a trophy. He tacked sketches to my fridge with magnetized bottle caps, bridges that crossed water he hadn't yet seen from up-high seawalls that held the bay where it belonged. He had hands that could turn a crooked porch square, and when he closed on the small place on Lancaster Street, the one with brick that would need tuck-pointing forever and a view that made drunks poetic, he handed me the deed like he was passing a baton. "Don't get sentimental," I said. "I won't," he said, already losing the fight. We met Lydia at a charity gala under strings of lights down by the harbor. She had the kind of smile that knew exactly when to arrive and when to leave, the kind of handshake that measured grip like an instrument, firm enough to register, never enough to bruise. She worked in public relations for a family company that owned pieces of the port, the way old bankers owned pieces of the city. She knew how to frame a view. Her dress was the color of bottled water, and her nails were the color of egrets. She said my crab cakes were famous, and I told her fame is for people who can afford it. She laughed. It was a good laugh. I believed it belonged to her. They married without fuss, a backyard with string lights again, because Baltimore likes to repeat what it gets right. Lydia's parents sent glass bowls that caught the afternoon sun like prisms. Harborspan sent a potted tree no one could name. Noah built a pergola that climbed toward the second story and promised shade by August. For a while, dinner was a time and not a hope. Lydia added lemon to everything, and I added Old Bay to everything she didn't catch first. The city did what it does. It let us be ordinary. The day the crane's cable slipped, the weather couldn't decide between rain and heat. Noah had been overseeing a rigging check on Pier 7. A young apprentice walked too close to the swing radius. Someone shouted. Noah moved without thinking, a kind of math his body knew by heart, momentum being destiny. The cable lashed, the load shifted, the apprentice lived, and the world came down wrong on the bones of my son's left leg. Diesel salt iron. Men's voices turning high and thin because fear raises pitch. He didn't pass out. They tell me he didn't make a sound through extraction, and for a week I wished he had, because silence is a room where pain builds its furniture. The hospital rooms were beige and loud. Machines blinked green in an optimism I didn't share. Lydia arrived in clothes that didn't wrinkle and eyes that didn't look down. She stood at the foot of the bed and said the things educated people say when the unfixable has announced itself. Logistics referrals, a surgeon with an office downtown whose last name opened doors. She held his hand like a memory of a hand. She left to take calls. I watched the ceiling with him. 2 days later, he woke me saying the same 3 words until the syllables fell apart. I can't run. Rehab was a clock that refused to go faster. We marked time by the way proteins tasted when a body needs them, by the number of staples removed by a therapist named Leo, who had forearms like ropes and a voice that cut through the reflex to quit. I learned the weights of ice packs and the length of a minute when you measure it against ache. Noah learned where to put breath inside strain. He did not learn how to like being helped. Lydia organized a fundraiser for a different patient, and I told myself that was kindness in motion. She texted more than she visited. When she did visit, she brought the good coffee and asked almost clinically what milestones we were at. Noah told her even when the answer made him flinch. People think a life changes in a single violence. Sometimes it changes in the quiet that follows, steady as a second hand. The knock at dawn came 1 month after he was discharged. I recognized law enforcement boots before they said anything. Training doesn't leave you even when you wish it would. 2 officers, one young enough to be my student in another life, one trying not to look apologetic in front of the other. The older one read the paper because that's how the game is played: embezzlement under state statute, and a federal shadow falling behind numbers attached like anchors. 310,000, 6 weeks of transfers, a pattern stupid enough to make sense. They let him dress. I tied his shoe because his hand shook, and because there is a hush you owe a man who is trying not to show he's breaking. Neighbors watch through curtains. There's a kindness to it, people who have seen enough to know there is always another side and a cruelty too. Lydia stood at the end of the drive in a navy coat that made her look taller. She was on the phone, voice hushed and important. She hung up when the officers led Noah past her, touched his sleeve with 2 fingers, not moving to kiss his cheek, because cameras had appeared and cameras make strangers of everyone. Tell them the truth, she said. It landed between instruction and absolution, and neither of them stuck. Booking is a sequence, and someone designed it that way, so your mind has no purchase. Fingerprints, the hot breath of a printer, a chair. You're never sure is meant to be uncomfortable or if it just is. They asked questions my son did not answer because he had listened to me when I explained the 5th in a kitchen big enough to hold exactly 3 people and 1 judgmental cat. A detective I knew back when we all had more hair nodded at me without a smile. They set bail as if they were doing us a favor. We paid. By noon, the first headlines had learned my maiden name and my old job title. By evening, the call-in shows were saying rusted legend and finding tone where there wasn't any. Malloy found a microphone and said words he would later pretend he hadn't. Trust betrayed fiduciary duty, community harm. Lydia's statement ran in 3 papers and 2 sites. It said she was shocked and asked for privacy and believed in the process. I read it twice and understood that the truth of a sentence and its function rarely coincide. We gathered at my kitchen table with bottles of water sweating onto old wood and the stack of paper the state had been generous enough to include redacted bank records, printed fat with ink and affidavit, with the edges clipped by a black marker, a timeline made by someone who doesn't believe in coincidence, and therefore sees it everywhere. I wrote dates on a legal pad and wrote the words physical therapy. Next to 3 of them, the name of the clinic and the time, because I had signed my name on the intake sheet, and people can argue with memories but not with ink. The fourth transfer's timestamp was 03:14 in the morning. Noah sleeps like a statue, unmoving as if called to it. The idea of him logging into a secured system from home while learning how to retie his body struck me as ridiculous in the precise way lies often are. He sat with his shoulders rounded and his forehead in his palm. "Maybe I missed something," he said. "Maybe there was a window I didn't close, or—" "You didn't do it," I said. He looked up because certainty can be a kind of violence, and he was trying to decide if he needed to defend himself from mine. "We will find where the door is," I added softer. Doors always make a sound. The house quieted after midnight. The city's noise backs off then, and you can hear the refrigerator like a ship far off. I wash the mugs because keeping the kitchen clean has always been how I refuse surrender. When the water ran hot, the window fogged and the word morel drifted up from a memory, like something written under lemon juice and heat, a credit card slip I'd thrown in the drawer because it wasn't mine. The drawer on the far right sticks when it rains. I wrestled it, made noise I hoped wouldn't wake him, and dug through rubber bands, tape a pack of batteries that might still hold charge if you're brave. The slip was there under a takeout menu, Chesapeake Yacht Club, a charge for a private room signature crisp and precise, first initial L, last name Morel. Lydia's maiden name hadn't been on my tongue enough to taste strange until then. The date lined up unpleasantly with one of the transfers. I didn't jump to conclusions because that's how people fall. I went to the stack of mail she'd collected and not opened. Lydia prefers digital during the weeks Noah was in rehab. There were invoices for media list services and a receipt for a dockside rental on a weekend. She had said she was volunteering at a shelter uptown. There was a glossy brochure for a Bahamas firm promising privacy, discretion, and bespoke solutions, the kind of language people use when they need to be reassured they are important enough to hide. Upstairs, the floor creaked. Old houses talk. I put the papers back where I found them because discovery can be as delicate as surgery, and I don't like to lose blood. I don't have to. The next day, I asked for the rehab schedule, and the clinic printed it without blinking. The receptionist had a crush on Leo, and crushes are good for bureaucracy. I pinned the schedule above my desk and threaded string between dates like I was teaching myself to see. I wrote Harbor Club under one and Lancaster 3:14 a.m. under another. I took out a map because maps make liars of men who think distance protects them. The porch was warm under my bare feet that night. Fells Point gives you river wind when the rest of the city sweats. The streetlight hummed. A patrol car slid by and didn't slow. Across the harbor, cranes stood as if nothing could unseat them. Noah slept finally, the kind that looks like surrender, but is just the body admitting it's not a machine. I scrolled through an old contact list I hadn't opened since the day I turned in my government badge. The names looked like fossils. Some numbers would go to strangers now. Some would ring in empty rooms. I stopped at one that had not been called enough to be deleted and not enough to be familiar. The screen reflected my face the way water does, true and distorted at once. I put the phone to my ear and waited for someone on the other end to decide what the past meant. "Rivera," the voice said, rough with sleep and cigarettes. "It's Ruth." A pause. I figured. Nobody else calls this late and lets the silence do the talking. I need eyes. The kind that don't blink when something expensive looks back. "Meet me at Sip and Slide," he said. "Corner booth. Bring coffee I don't have to pretend is good." The diner sat under a tired neon sign that made the S stutter. Inside the vinyl had been repaired with clear tape, and the photos on the wall made the crab cakes look taller than physics allows. Dean Rivera slid into the booth, facing the door the way he always had. Thick shoulders, new lines at the mouth, the same careful eyes. He once ran cyber for the state police before he learned private work pays and cash and curses. "Still drink it black?" I asked, setting the cup down. "I do now," he said, then tipped his chin toward me. "You still treat silence like a weapon." "I treat it like a tool," I said. He cracked a smile. Tell me. I laid out the numbers first. 6 weeks, $310,000, 4 transfers that lined up too neatly with rehab sessions, and a 3:14 a.m. timestamp that tasted wrong. I told him about Lydia's yacht club slip signed under Morel and the Bahamas brochure that had arrived as if money was a place you could mail a letter to. I slid the packet of the state's early file across the table, pages warm from my hand. Dean flip-skimmed without moving his lips, occasionally tapping the corner of a page with a fingernail when the math offended him. He pushed back the bank logs. See the login metadata footers? They redacted most of the IPs. I tapped the black rectangles, but they missed a tail. He angled the page toward the light. The last 2 octets had been left alone by a clerk who didn't know what mattered. He pulled a pen from behind his ear and wrote on a napkin numbers and dots. These sit inside a block that doesn't belong to Harborspan, he said. We can check Aaron, but I don't even need to. Vance Maritime has bought chunks of the city, including address space. They run their VPN concentrator out of Calvert Street. There's a sticker on the rack that still says Vance Logistics because no one down there likes change. You've seen it. I've seen the invoices, he said, and a firewall rule I didn't like. He took out his phone and typed with the efficiency of a man who thinks in constants. Public whois agrees, he said a minute later. You could have done that part, but I know you like to watch me work. I like to watch things that matter, I said. He leaned back. We'll need more than a whois. Prosecutor's going to say NAT shared IP space, bad inference, blah, blah. You need timestamps and correlation. You need to show your son wasn't anywhere near a keyboard he could have used. You said he's wearing a health tracker. He wears whatever the rehab guys tell him to. It logs sleep steps. He hates therapy sessions. Bring the watch, he said. We'll mirror the data. If it shows he's under stimulation at the clinic at, say, 10 a.m., and the system says a transfer went out at 10:05, that's humanly impossible for him to have done from the clinic. If it shows RM sleep at 3 in the morning when a manual approval hits, even better. Machines love numbers. Courts love machines when men sign them. He pushed his coffee aside. I also want eyes on Lydia. You don't hire a yacht club just to talk about feelings. You thinking what I'm thinking? He grinned without humor. That people who love discretion love the theater of it too. Clubs, private rooms, corners of marinas where they think the only witnesses are herons. I pulled out a folded photo, Charles Vance shaking hands with a state senator under a ribbon at a dry dock. Lydia stood 3 bodies back, half smile like a watermark. Dry dock 12, I said. The family owns it through a layered LLC. She uses it as backdrop when she's playing patron. Dry Dock 12 has bad lighting, he said, and the kind of security that thinks badges are a personality. I'll fly a drone from the public lot on the other side, keep altitude under the FAA line, stay legal enough to get scolded and not arrested. I'll bring a lens your grandmother could see from. You still have a grandmother? She outlived 2 mayors, he said. She'll outlive me if I keep eating here. The waitress refilled coffees without asking and slid a plate of fries across the table as if the booth demanded tribute. Dean ate, one chewed, made a face, ate another anyway. When do you want this started? He asked. It already has, I said. Noah handed over the health watch that afternoon with the reluctance of a man giving up a crutch he hates. Dean paired it to a forensic device that looked like a thick phone wearing handcuffs, walked him through authorizations, uploaded only what we needed. The graphs, stacked like small city skylines, heart rate spikes during therapy, long flat valves of sleep, a restless hour around 2 in the morning when pain forgets the clock. Dean ran the times against the bank's murky timeline and frowned. They've rounded to the nearest 5 minutes on purpose, he said, sloppy enough to be strategic. But your clinic logs will be precise. We'll pin the appointments by the second. We drove to the rehab center. The receptionist with the crush on Leo printed logs with the speed of a person whose crush had just walked by. Don't tell him, she said. He thinks he's a tree. I won't tell him I said, even though Leo already knows what people think when he lifts a patient like he's picking up a shirt. Back at my kitchen table, Dean layered data clinic check-ins, watch entries, the state's alleged transfer times, the stray IP tails. He used string like I do. It amused him. He pinned one thread from Pier 7 to Calvert Street on a paper map of the city and said, "If we can place Lydia on Calvert on any of those days, I'm buying myself a donut." "You don't eat donuts," I said. "Today I do," he said. He showed up 2 nights later with a memory card and a smile that meant something good had risk attached. "Dry Dock 12 is uglier than the picture," he said, "but it photographs like a cathedral if you catch the light. Your girl brought her father a ledger, not a metaphorical one paper bound with a leather strap, the kind accountants buy when they want to feel like artists. She held it like a purse. He took it like a purchase, time-stamped, distance confirmed." We scrolled through stills Lydia in a gray coat that made her hair pop head-tip toward Charles Vance's ear, Vance holding the ledger and the kind of pen men use when they want people to see the pen. A security guard stood 3 yards away pretending to be bored. The next frame showed him looking directly at the drone like a man recognizes a sound older than his job. "Is that where you got the smile?" I asked. "I got the smile when I left," Dean said. A black Explorer eased out behind me when I pulled onto Key Highway. Different lanes, same turns. I went around the block once, twice. He learned how to pretend he wasn't following around the second. I turned into the Whole Foods lot and used 3 minutes of someone else's errand to let him get bored. He peeled off. Port security gets jumpy when anybody points a camera at anything. Occupational hazard. I left the drone in a friend's locker anyway. No reason to let them inventory my toys. He handed me a small box. "This is for you," he said. I opened it. A watch lay inside, sleek and stainless, the face clean as a mirror. "I don't need a watch." "It's not for you," he said. "It's for Lydia." "You said she likes anything that looks like it belongs in a magazine. This records in short bursts. When it hears names, you train it to care about. Public spaces only and only when you tap the stem. Your thumb, your call. Laws like that. You're telling me to give a woman I don't like a gift she'll love. I'm telling you, people who curate their lives love accessories," he said. "And that there's a yacht club patio where the wind carries voices well and the membership roster reads like an indictment that hasn't been written yet." I turned the watch over in my hand. Light moved across it like water. "Train it to what words?" "Her father's first and last," he said. "Morel, Bahamas if you want a bonus. Seawall, budget, approvals. Keep it simple or you'll get a lot of somebody ordering mahi-mahi." He had thought too much for this to be improvisation. I asked the question anyway. "Where does this leave chain of custody?" "In a folder labeled Exemplar A on a drive with an SHA 256 hash printed twice and signed across tape," he said. "We'll keep a twin in my safe. I'll notarize. You'll notarize. We'll make any prosecutor who wants to hold his nose use both hands." I found Lydia on an afternoon when the harbor sky had decided to look like tin. She was at the corner table of the Café on Thames, where practitioners of public relations pretend to drink espresso while inhaling news. She set her phone face down when she saw me. "Ruth," she said, the word shaped like a compliment and carrying none. "I brought you something," I said, and set the box on the table. "A belated congratulations for that award you posted about. City needs ambassadors." She blinked at the watch like it had been delivered by air. "You didn't have to." "I didn't," I said. She lifted it, weighed it, and slipped it over her wrist in one motion so practiced it looked like a reach for a lever. "It's perfect," she said, which is a thing you can say about an object that can't argue. "It suits you," I said, and left before she could make gratitude into something I owed her. On the way out, I passed a man whose suit had been cut for someone thicker. He looked through me, and then at the window, where we were both reflected in the glass for a second, a woman carrying her own past like a briefcase, and a man trying to figure out what it weighed. The first recording happened 3 days later because the world likes symmetry but doesn't require it. I sat 2 tables behind Lydia at the yacht club patio, a sunglasses and sun hats congregation facing a harbor that tried its best to look clean. I ordered water and a salad because it's hard to look unremarkable over soup. Lydia's watch face ticked once when she tapped it. She didn't notice, or if she did, she cued it to time her breath for a presentation. Charles Vance arrived late, smelling of cologne that remembered cedar as a story someone else told it. He kissed his daughter's cheek like television says men do, and sat with his back to the windbreak. Names travel differently in the air. The watch recorded them anyway. Not full sentences, just enough to stitch together into something with edges, approvals. Procurement overruns optics. We move the PR retainer through Baylight. The consultant signs off on his own invoice. Seawall Phase 2 hits next quarter. Nobody checks if they think the city is grateful. The Morel account is clean. I told you not to say country names on patios. I left when a server looked at me twice, and I leave places when people look twice. I walked to the public pier where a saxophonist practiced scales like apologies. I called Dean. Got it, he said. Bring me the watch. We'll dump it, hash it, write the transcript once and only once. By midnight, we had 3 files on a drive in a fireproof bag and a notary stamp drawing on paper that made my name look fancier than it feels. The transcript read like 2 people doing business with their own reflections. It wasn't the recording of a confession. It was a photograph of habit. Now the money, Dean said. He pulled up a diagram with boxes and arrows and the blunt logic of theft. Baylight PR LLC, he said. Registered to a P.O. box in Towson. Agent of record is a law clerk who doesn't know she's the agent of record. Payment from HarborSpan's Seawall Fund to Baylight. Baylight pays Vance Maritime for strategic community outreach. Vance moves it to a service company in Nassau that happens to share a suite with 12 other service companies. From there, a personal account Morel covers the charge on a club room and an offshore custodian fee. You can prove all that. I can prove enough to ask for the rest, he said. And I can show your son never sat in the right place to do the wrong thing. The watch tells part. Clinic logs tell part. Traffic cameras on Calvert and Lombard tell part. Lydia's car isn't shy. The rest lives on servers that are allergic to daylight. He looked at the clock. One more thing he said. Your son's company uses a third-party identity provider. Their logs are richer than the bank's. If I can get a preservation letter out of a friendly before someone sends a contrary instruction, we'll keep the past from being wiped by a maintenance script. I nodded. He drafted the letter on my kitchen table, language tight as a drum. I signed it in my capacity as counsel and sent it certified because people treat paper that requires a signature like it can bite. In the morning, the city woke up the way it always does. Garbage trucks announced themselves by banging cans against corners. Gulls argued like old men. A jogger ran by our porch, not because he needed to be anywhere, but because he liked to pretend he did. I made coffee strong and ugly and eggs that tasted better than they looked. Noah came down the stairs with the brace in his hand instead of on his leg, which I noticed and didn't mention. He sat, poured too much hot sauce, and ate like a man who had found a hill and meant to stand on it. Dean brought over 2 small silver drives and set them on the table, as if he were laying down pieces on a board neither of us would name. Primary and mirror, he said. Hashes printed, envelopes signed. Put one where you keep the things you won't lose, even if the house catches fire. I slid the mirror into the false bottom of the metal bread box my grandmother had used when bread lasted longer and people pretended it didn't. The primary went into my briefcase next to a pen that once signed an indictment and a postcard from a beach we never visited. On the map above my desk, red string cut across the city like nerves. Calvert to the harbor, harbor to Nassau. Nassau to a living room where a man with a leg that would never be the same traced the shape of a porch with his finger and said nothing. The room held its breath. Outside, the water hit the bulkhead steady as a metronome that had decided to keep time whether anyone wanted music or not. 10 days turned the courthouse from a place we passed through into a place that recognized the tread of my shoes. The fog lifted. The bricks stayed damp. Courtroom 5 filled early with the quiet that comes before a crowd decides what it thinks. Malloy had more paper than last time and a confidence that looked rented. Lydia sat at his table in a charcoal suit with pearl studs that threw tiny moons when she turned her head. Noah set his cane under the table and folded his hands to keep them from telling on him. Dean took a seat 2 rows back where he could see the screens and the exit. "All rise," the bailiff said, and everyone did. Judge Bennett took the bench with the same coffee, the same stack of files. "We're here on the complainant's motion for injunctive relief and on the defense's response," she said. Her voice cut clean. "Mr. Malloy, call your first witness." He stood like a man stepping into lighting he'd asked for. The complainant calls Ms. Andrea Pike. A woman in a navy dress took the stand and swore in. Malloy walked her through credentials: project accountant at Harborspan, 6 years and certified. This license, that. He handed her a binder and she performed the familiar ritual of identifying documents, account summaries, transfer confirmations, a neat timeline. He made sure the numbers sounded fat in the air. These records show 4 transfers totaling $310,000 from the seawall rehabilitation project to an account ending in 41. He said, "Whose name is on that account?" "Mr. Noah Callahan's," she said. "And who approved the transfers?" She flipped. Request and approval fields list N. Callahan as authorizer. "Thank you." He let the answer settle like silt. "No further question?" Cross-Judge Bennett asked. I stood. "Ms. Pike, you oversee multiple projects." "Yes." "On how many of those do you personally verify that the digital approval is physically made by the person whose name appears?" "That's handled by IT and internal audit. So you accept that when a screen says a name, a person made the choice behind it." "That's the system," she said, a little defensive. "Let's talk about system time," I said. "The transfer on April 12th, what time?" She read, 10:07 a.m. I lifted a page. "This is a clinic log from Charm City Physical Therapy. It records Mr. Callahan checked in at 9:58 a.m. for a TENS session duration, 30 minutes continuous stimulation. Do you have any reason to believe he could log into Harborspan from the clinic's patient room while hooked to a machine that keeps his hands busy?" I let the question hang. "You've never met the TENS device," I said when she didn't answer. Objection from Malloy, calls for speculation. "Sustained," said Bennett. "Ask it differently, Ms. Callahan." "Ms. Pike," I said, "is there any company rule that requires you to confirm a digital approval with a second factor that can't be typed by someone who isn't the named employee?" "That would be an IT policy," she said. "Exactly," I said. No further questions. Malloy called a second, a systems administrator named Victor Hess, who wore a tie too long and a beard he kept because someone once told him he looked smarter with it. "You maintain Harborspan's user accounts?" Malloy asked. "Yes." "Do the logs show that Mr. Callahan's credentials were used to authorize these transfers?" "They do." "From what IP address?" Hess hesitated. "The logs I reviewed were summarized. They don't contain full addressing." Nonetheless, Malloy said the credentials are Mr. Callahan's. "Yes," Hess said, more certain. Cross. I walked to the witness box with a folder I wanted him to resent. "Mr. Hess, you're familiar with what an access log contains when it isn't summarized for a courtroom." He frowned. "Yes." "Does your system record the public IP seen by your identity provider when a user logs in from outside your corporate network?" "It does." "And when a user logs in from inside your corporate network, does the identity provider see your VPN concentrator's public IP?" "Yes." I handed him a sheet. "This is an AirIon lookup for the IP block that includes 144.3.99. Read the registrant." He squinted. "VANCE Maritime Holdings. Does Harborspan own that block?" "No." "Now please look at the identity provider's custodian affidavit, paragraph 6. I slid another document in a clear sleeve. It responds to a preservation letter served last week. What public IPs are associated with logins into Mr. Callahan's account during the 4 challenged transactions? He read slow now. 2 logins from the 104.53.4 block. The one registered to Vance Maritime. Yes. And where is Harbor Span's concentrator? Different block, he admitted. So when the system says N. Callahan, your own records show the access originated from Vance Maritime's network, not Harbor Span's. Malloy stood, objection argumentative. Overruled, Bennett said. He can answer. Hess swallowed. Yes. I returned to counsel table. The gallery rustled. Lydia looked straight ahead. Defense exhibits, the judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. I lifted the first slim folder. Exhibit A, the clinic's certified treatment logs for Mr. Callahan, with timestamps coinciding with the state's alleged transfer times. Exhibit B, data extracted from Mr. Callahan's health device, attested to by the manufacturer's custodian, showing sleep phases and clinic sessions matching Exhibit A. Exhibit C, identity provider affidavit. Identifying the public IP addresses at the time of authorizations as belonging to Vance Maritime, not Harbor Span. Exhibit D, photographs captured from a public vantage point near Dry Dock 12 showing complainant Lydia Vance transferring a paper ledger to Charles Vance, her father, within the same window. Exhibit E, audio segments recorded in a public setting by a device in Ms. Vance's possession, limited by trigger words and authenticating hash containing discussion of Baylight, retainer, and moving funds through a public relations vendor. Foundation, Bennett asked. Affidavits are attached. Hash values are included. The clinic custodian is present, as is our forensic custodian. Mr. Malloy, he looked irritated in a polished way. We object to C, D, and E. C relies on hearsay from a third-party identity provider. D is invasive and taken with a drone. From a public lot, Dean said from the gallery before I could stop him. Mr. Rivera, Bennett said, without looking up. This is not your turn to speak. Dean held up his hands. I kept my face still. Malloy continued. E is a covert recording. In a private club's outdoor patio, I said, with ambient voices and no expectation of privacy under Maryland's case law, when 2 parties speak audibly in a public setting. The device belonged to Ms. Vance, once gifted, and she activated it with her own tap. She is free to record her own life. The fact that she was speaking aloud in the open is her choice. Bennett paged through the packet, eyes moving fast. Exhibit C is admitted as to the existence of the records and their contents under business records exception. Weight goes to trial, she said. Exhibit D were these images captured from public property. Yes, I said, altitudes within FAA guidance. Admitted subject to cross on a distance and identification. Exhibit E, Mr. Malloy, you can argue privacy all afternoon, but the statute is not on your side if the recording party is present and consents. She didn't consent to being recorded by. She wore the device, admitted, Bennett said. Proceed. Malloy tightened his mouth. Then I call Lydia Vance. Lydia walked to the stand like a runway-learned humility. She swore in, placed her hands neatly in her lap. Ms. Vance, Malloy said, describe the impact of Mr. Callahan's alleged conduct on your reputation and finances. She did, with the controlled tremor of someone coached to look like a person who'd been told to stop looking coached. Words like brand community leadership. She spoke about a donation delayed because a board had questions. Cross, I said. Ms. Vance, I began, is the entity Baylight PR LLC associated with you? No, she said, bright as glass. I don't own a PR firm. Do you direct work to it? I don't handle vendor payments. Who does? Operations, she said. I held up a page. This is an email from your account to HarborSpan's accounting contact copied to Baylight's generic address, suggesting Baylight for narrative management and stakeholder outreach. Is that your email? She looked, yes. And this is a still photograph of you handing a ledger to your father at Dry Dock 12. Do you deny that's you? She looked at the photo a long second and then at Malloy as if the picture could be argued with if she angled it right. It's me. What's in the ledger? I don't know. He asked me to bring it. And on the yacht club patio, I tapped the transcript. You used the phrase, "We move the PR retainer through Baylight," and "The Morel account is clean." "Morel is your maiden name." She said nothing. "Is Morel your maiden name?" I repeated. "Yes." "Do you maintain an account under that name offshore?" "I don't see how that—" "Answer the question." Malloy stood. "Objection, privilege, and relevance." "Overruled as to relevance," Bennett said. "Ms. Vance, answer." She exhaled through her nose like a woman taught not to show it when she loses. "Yes," she said. "It's a family account." "Does that account pay for private rooms at the yacht club?" "I don't handle that," she said, almost a whisper. "Did you know that your company's IP address was used to authorize transfers the state attributes to my son?" "I don't know anything about IPs," she said, recovering some brightness. "That sounds technical." "It is," I said. "No further questions." Judge Bennett leaned back and laced her fingers. The room made the small noises rooms make when they've run out of big ones. She looked at Malloy. "Any other witnesses?" He had one more, an internal auditor who tried to make inference look like fact and failed under 3 minutes of precise questions. When he sat down for the last time, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand as if words had spilled. Counsel Bennett said approach. We did. The sidebar hum wrapped us in white noise. "Mr. Malloy," she said quietly, "your record on injunctive relief is thin in places where it should be thick. Ms. Callahan has presented evidence that the access trail points away from the defendant and toward a network controlled by the complainant's family. I am not making findings on guilt or innocence today, but I am not going to freeze a house built on a porch without better cause." She went back on the record. "The motion for injunctive relief is denied with prejudice," she said. "Conditions of release remain unchanged pending next steps." As to the state's case, she continued, turning a page, "I have reviewed the affidavits, listened to the recordings, and considered the identity provider's submission. This court finds a significant question as to the integrity of the digital approvals relied upon to establish probable cause." Silence got heavier. Accordingly, she said the charges against Mr. Callahan are dismissed without prejudice. The clerk will transmit the record of these proceedings, including Exhibits A through E, to the state's Attorney for Independent Review and to the Office of the Attorney General for consideration of potential offenses arising from the conduct of Lydia Vance and Charles Vance. The parties are advised that preservation orders will issue forthwith to Harbor Span, Vance Maritime, and Baylight PR LLC. Malloy started to object and then didn't. Lydia's face held. Her fingers whitened and released around the pen she had been balancing. Noah closed his eyes and opened them. The brace under the table clicked when he shifted his foot. "Mr. Callahan," Bennett said, looking directly at him, "you are excused from these proceedings. You will coordinate with your counsel regarding any further subpoenas. Ms. Vance, do not leave the jurisdiction without notifying your counsel and the court." The gavel touched wood once. Not a strike, a mark. People stood slowly. The reporters remembered how to breathe and then forgot how to walk. They stumbled into one another, trying to get to the aisle. The bailiff said order because that's what he says, and the word worked the way it usually does enough. We collected our papers by touch. Dean handed me the fireproof bag like a man passing a baton and a baby all at once. On the way out, the clerk who had once blushed pressed a folded letter into my palm. "Identity provider sent a supplemental," she said. "Came in during argument." I read it in the hall, the fluorescent light turning white into hospital. 2 more log entries, both during transfers, both from the Vance block, one tagged with the device fingerprint matching a workstation registered to Vance PR03. I folded the letter once and slid it into the inside pocket where I keep things I don't intend to lose. In the corridor, Noah leaned against the cool wall and breathed like a man who had set down a load heavier than he had planned to carry this far. "We going home?" he asked. "We are," I said. Outside Pratt Street had dried to the color of baked bread. The harbor wind knocked a gull sideways, and it corrected without apology. The food truck stood where I'd left it, hood-flecked with salt that hadn't come from the sea. I unlocked the hatch and set the stainless to warm. The flame took on first light and held. The steel sang when it heated a thin note only people who cook on trucks hear. I set the spatula down and worked by habit rolls split griddle-tamped crab, folded into a patty that held together because I told it to. 2 dock workers came caps, low hands, nicked and clean. They didn't ask questions. They paid, nodded at Noah, and ate standing up, eyes on the harbor like men who could read weather off the water. When the last bun browned, I killed the flame. Metal ticked as it cooled. We packed in the practiced order condiments first, then pans nested like words you keep in your pocket. The latch found its seat. I turned the key. The truck smelled like pepper and soap. We drove home the slow way, hugging the water where Pratt becomes Eastern, then cutting back to Lancaster. The bricks out front looked like they always had a little tired, a little proud. The porch still needed another coat. Noah got out with his cane, tested his weight, and then without looking at me, took the 3 steps up, holding the rail only for balance. The cane stayed by the truck. Inside the house had the day's heat in it. I cracked a window. The bay answered with a salt breath the city pretends not to need. On the kitchen table, our paperwork sat arranged like a map folded back to the part of the country that matters. I put it in the drawer that sticks. It stuck. I didn't mind. Hungry, I asked. Always, he said and smiled like a man remembering how. I made eggs because that's what we have at the end of long days, and because the skillet knows me. He ate at the counter like he used to when the blueprint tubes leaned in a corner, and the only problem worth solving was how to fit a bridge into a budget without insulting physics. He kept his left foot flat ankle steady, a small triumph that didn't need applause. "You going to lecture me about using the rail?" he asked. "Only if you pretend you didn't," I said. We sat on the steps after dishes, backs to the door street before us. The sun eased down the block like a car that knew where to park. A neighbor walked a dog that hated scooters. Across the cobbles, a couple took pictures like the city couldn't be trusted to look this good again. Somewhere, a radio carried an Orioles game half a pitch behind. A gull tried to steal from a trash can and lost to a lid that had learned how to fight. "Post on the west side is out of square," Noah said, eye on the porch column. "If I shim the base, I can bring the rail level without moving the bracket." "You saying that to convince me or yourself?" "Both," he said and shrugged. I leaned back against the door, felt paint warm my shoulder through cotton. The bay knocked its soft fist against the bulkhead. In the living room, the clock we don't wind kept quiet. We didn't fill the silence because silence wasn't a problem to fix. Light crawled across the banister until it found his hand and stayed there. He flexed his fingers the way a man checks a tool he trusts. When the first street light came on, we went inside. I put the kettle on because evenings call for tea even when they don't. He set the cane by the wall and left it there. The porch settled the way old wood does when the heat leaves it. The house held. The city breathed. The water kept time against the stones. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.